Now, Yoda, I don't know if in Dagobah you've heard of any famous philosophers from the United States, but one of them is named John Rawls.
Tell me more if you can.
Well, John Rawls wrote a famous book called A Theory of Justice in 1971. And yes, that was even before I was born.
Old you are not.
That's true. In comparison to Yoda, I am very young. Rawls' theory of justice revolved around the adaptation of two fundamental principles of justice, which would in turn, he believed, guarantee a just and morally acceptable society. And it started with two principles. The first is called the equality principle.
Tell me more.
The equality principle guarantees the right of each person to have the most extensive basic liberty compatible with the liberty of others. So if you think about the First Amendment to the Constitution, it says that everybody gets as much freedom of speech as they want, right? But it's been interpreted that you basically get that maximization of that right, unless, for example, you take away somebody else's rights. And I think that Rawls would agree with that as an idea of his equality principle. Or if you take another part of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, that everybody can practice whatever religion they want. And really the courts have only ruled that the limit on this is if you, like, hurt other people, or, do something like, if you do something that harms somebody else, then the courts will say that's not okay. But other than that, they really don't care what you believe religious-wise or don't believe religious-wise. Does that make sense, Yoda?
Tell me more.
Well, the second principle is called the difference principle, and it says that all social and economic positions have to be to everyone's advantage and open to all, okay? And I think that this is easy to understand if you think of the analogy of like a track. See, you probably haven't ever been to a track meet, because that's not really a very Star Wars thing, Yoda. But at a track meet, everybody doesn't line up at the same line, because some people have got the inside edge and some people are on the outside edge. So the people who are running on the inside edge would have like a super advantage. People on the outside edge would be getting the shaft because they'd actually have to run farther than everybody else. Well, Rawls would say that that's something that's wrong with U.S. society today. Like, everybody is running a race, but like some people start off with a huge advantage over other people. And Rawls would say that that's not okay. And so he would find any form of discrimination to be a huge problem, because he thinks that your success in this world should be based on your effort and your talents, and not based on things that you can't control, like other people's perceptions of you. And so an example of like how he would think about, like he would approve of laws against housing discrimination, that like if you have the money for the place and you've got good credit, you should be able to rent it. He would think that that was a good law. Or another example, I think you could argue, is that Rawls would be in support of things like affirmative action. That everybody should have equal opportunity, and so even if you didn't get like the greatest high school experience, or even if your parents might not have gone to college, you would still get the opportunity to be able to go to college. And in college, you would be rated based on your own grades, right? You wouldn't get a free pass in that way, but you'd still get the opportunity to go to college similar to other people. Okay, Yoda. The key problem that Rawls had is, okay, well, if we have this equity principle and if we have this difference principle, well, how is it going to be applied universally to everybody? And he came up with an idea known as the veil of ignorance. So if we put the veil of ignorance over Yoda, and Yoda was the decision maker in the society, then he would have to make a decision from what Rawls calls the original position. Like, he wouldn't know whether or not his decision was going to benefit him or not. And so Rawls' idea is that if you don't know if the decisions are going to benefit you or not, you will make the most fair decision, because this decision is going to come back to you. I think that his idea really is like taking the ideas that we talked about from Kant and trying to think about them in terms of like a government type system. Rawls talked about his theory this way about the veil of ignorance. Among the essential features of this situation is that no one knows his place in society, his class position, social status, nor does anyone know his fortune and the distribution of natural assets and abilities, his intelligence, strength, and the like. I shall even assume that the parties do not know their conceptions of the good or their special psychological propensities. The principles of justice are chosen behind a veil of ignorance. So you wouldn't know if you were bright, if you were dumb, if you were rich or you were poor. You wouldn't know if you're black or you were white. You wouldn't know how these things were going to affect you once you came out from the veil of ignorance. You'd have to make a decision that would affect everybody, and you wouldn't know how it would affect you personally. He thinks that by having only general knowledge about the facts of life and society, each decision maker would therefore make the most rational choice, and that he thinks that that would therefore be the most moral choice because that decision would have to be universalized to everybody. Now Yoda, Rawls believes it is critical for society to be built on justice. Olin gives an excellent example in your textbook of what Rawlsian justice would look like in the United States, and he gives the example of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And the reason is that everybody would be given equal opportunities to be able to participate in society, that outlawing that some people don't get to participate because of the color of their skin, something that people have nothing that they get to do anything about at all, would be inherently unjust in a Rawlsian type of society. And so I think that if you're looking for an example of like justice, I would go there. I think another example you could give would be like the Americans with Disabilities Act. In the Americans with Disabilities Act, everyone in America was granted certain accessibilities, you know, in terms of their jobs, in terms of their access to education. It wouldn't matter if you were blind, if you were deaf, if you had a physical disability, etc. What? Or if you were walking with a cane like Yoda, that you would be given the same rights to be able to get into a building as somebody else. Now granted, Yoda could just float, but your average person who has a disability cannot just make their disability go away. Not everybody has to force Yoda.